Shalom and welcome back to SightedMoon newsletter, audio newsletter for February the 13th, 12th, 13th, 2021, the 30th day of the 12th month. Well, technically today is actually I believe it's what day is it? Shabbat was the first, um, or the end of Shabbat was the first day, and then I believe Sunday was then the second, so it's now the third. It's now the third day of the month. Not mistaken. Anyway, could be wrong, but I believe it was the end of Shabbat was the new moon. All right. Yeah, I believe that's what was said in the newsletter. Many letters that I received in my email informing me that new moon, that the new moon was sighted. So I'm going to continue. So Passover on the 14th or the 15th, controversy. Shalom, Joseph. Do you keep the 14th of the first month, Last Supper, since you and I both share much of the traditional teaching from the Worldwide Church of God days? Should I assume a yes? Since it is not in Torah, should we treat it the same as for Purim and Hanukkah, which you have definitely condemned as adding to Torah? The person asking if Purim and Hanukkah are adding to Torah, then did Yeshua add to Torah by adding the symbols at the Last Supper, making it the new Passover date? First of all, Yeshua is the creator of all things and the one who told us about the holy days of Leviticus 23. Second, he did not add another holy day to Leviticus 23 as Hanukkah and Purim do. And to be frank, they aren't holy days. They're just historical celebrations. So I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing those, but to say they're holy is wrong. They're obviously not holy days. They are, I believe, they're commemorations of historical events. I mean, especially Esther. Hanukkah, I don't know too much about that. To be honest, I read the Maccabees, but that's not something I'm an expert in. But Esther is pretty clear that they did do something. And it seems to line up with Passover, ironically, of all things. Anyhow, he merely showed us new symbols, Yeshua did. But for the rest of this answer, you need to read to the end of this article. So which day is the Passover? Is it the beginning of the 14th or the end of the 14th going into the 15th day at sunset? Is it the beginning of the 14th, meaning is it the evening, the evening of the 14th, or is it the end, which is the daytime of the 14th going into the 15th evening? The problem many are having is arising in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So in Matthew, we read this, Matthew 26:17, and I read this for myself. Just read it on your own. So you must ask yourself the question, if this is the first day of unleavened bread, then Passover is already over with, right? Because Passover always precedes unleavened bread. So it is obvious that something is not kosher here in Matthew. A bad translation or just a real bad interpretation by someone who does not know the holy days. Matthew did know the holy days, being Jewish, so I am leaning to a bad interpretation. Keep in mind as you read this one important fact, Hebrews 13:7. Okay, Yeshua does not change and has not changed. But strange teachings abound in these last days, both from within the body as well as outside the body of believers. So study your Bible and search it daily to find the truth. And we also read in Malachi 3, verses 6 to 7. The Torah doesn't change. We read in Mark the following, Mark 14:12. And here we have a huge problem with the translation. You do not slaughter the Passover lamb on the first day of unleavened bread. The first day of unleavened bread is always on the 15th day of the month, and the Passover lambs were killed on the 14th. And I have a theory about what happened, but I'm going to keep reading on. So this is Exodus 12, and there's a big portion of that. I think it's verses 3 to 10, no, to 11. So the Passover lamb was killed at the end of the 14th and eaten that evening as the 15th day, which was the first day of unleavened bread, was about to begin. And just for clarification, I'm going to look it up. Let me just pause the video, look it up. So Exodus chapter 12, we're going to clear it up. When did that happen? The Passover. It says here, let's just look at the context here. So they're taking a lamb, and I believe they take it on the 10th day, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the 10th of the month. They take the lamb to inspect it and whatnot. They bring it to their house, and it lives with them for I think about 3 days or so, 4 days. He shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. And it says the same thing in the Septuagint, till the 14th of this month. And he shall kill it toward the evening. So in the Masoretic, it says in the evening of the 14th. So that means it's the beginning. Because if it's the evening of the 15th, that's not the same day anymore. The day begins scripturally in the evening. So this is the beginning of the 14th, which is the evening. She'll kill it toward evening. Or I mean, it could be that, or it could be toward the evening of the 15th. I mean, that's why this is such a controversial topic. It's not so clear, I guess, in this verse. All right, so let's go back. The Passover lamb was killed at the end of the 14th and eaten that evening as the 15th day, which was the first day of unleavened bread, was about to begin. This is why we are told to eat the Passover lamb with unleavened bread. Okay, so that's the understanding there. So once we read and understand the scriptures, we know that something is wrong with both Matthew and Mark when they say it was the first day of unleavened bread and they were going to prepare the Passover. It is not kosher. This has caused many to be confused about the timing of this event, which is why I go back to the Exodus and read it here. Let's look at Luke 22, verses 7 to 8. So Luke does the exact same thing. It is telling us that this day is already the 14th day and also the 15th day at the same time. Again, this is not right. Yeah, that's not correct. As I discuss this subject, those who want to hold to a certain position, which I will soon explain, quote the letter of Paul to Timothy, 2 Timothy 3:14. We have a very good research paper at tertullian.org, which shows us that the New Testament was created by the Nicene Council under Emperor Constantine's orders in 352 AD. Remember, Constantine was the guy that made Sunday the Sabbath. In tracing the origin of the Bible, one is led to AD 325 when Constantine the Great called the First Council of Nicaea, composed of 300 religious leaders. 3 centuries after Jesus lived, this council was given the task of separating divinely inspired writings from those of questionable origin. If the New Testament was put together 300s after the letter written to Timothy, so 300 years after, then what is Paul referring to when he says all scripture is breathed by Elohim and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for setting straight, for instruction in righteousness? Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I know where he's going with this, but I just want to preempt or interrupt this letter to say I wouldn't put it past Constantine and the Council of Nicaea to change words such as Passover to Easter, to put in words like the Holy Spirit and the Trinity, things like that, to suggest that there is a Trinity, or to modify the language in a way that is more favorable towards the belief in a Trinity. And as well, I wouldn't put it past them as well to also modify certain terms like they did with, where we have some confusion here about Passover and unleavened bread, because to be honest, these people didn't keep Passover and unleavened bread. So, uh, you know what? That could be one of the reasons why it's so confusing, because they don't keep it. These people that compiled the New Testament at that time, and maybe that's where the confusion lies, because these people uh, were not were not very savvy about when the holy days started, because they don't keep them. Okay, so let's keep going. Um, it could not be the New Testament, as it had not been put together at that time. It can be only the scriptures that he had at his disposal, which we are told exactly what they are in Luke. In fact, Luke is quoting Yeshua, who tells us what the scriptures are and what Paul's referring to. Okay, so Luke 24. Um, all right, now let me see. What am I going to read from here? So, pretty much the law, the prophets, and the writings. That's what they were talking about. I point this out because Paul's not talking about the New Testament, which had not yet been put together. And to be honest, a lot of Paul, not everything, but I mean, there are portions of Paul's writings that are, they're technically and literally letters to specific people, not meant to be published for the whole world. I'm not saying that it's a breach of confidentiality, but that's not his original intention. Let me write this letter to, for example, say I have a friend, John Smith, and this is the letter to John Smith from myself. I'm not writing this with the mind that the whole planet's going to read this letter. Do you know what I mean? So we're addressing very specific situations going on in our lives at that historical context in time. So a lot of what Paul writes applies to the situations going on at that time, and it isn't Torah. We have to keep that in mind. So when he says things like regarding how people should dress and things like that, so you have to put in the context and test it with the Torah. Does it actually line up with Torah? Because some of it is just his opinions. Some of it is his opinions. Not all of it, but there are parts where uh, he expresses his opinion. For example, when he says women shouldn't wear, he prefers women to not wear gold and to adorn themselves in nice garments and wearing makeup, things like that. But that's not in Torah that women can't do that. It just means that that's his opinion. His preference is for women to focus more on their internal character, as opposed to prioritizing their outward appearance or dressing up in, very rich clothing. And that was not very fitting for a believer in that time, when you have people who are also in the faith who may not be as well to do. So they're going to feel, you know, inferior to some degree, or it's just it's just something that's not very humble about it. So I mean, that's his opinion. It's not that I disagree with him, but it's not in Torah. That's not Torah, where it says women do not wear gold. In fact, you see many times the Israelites are wearing gold earrings. The women and the females are wearing gold, especially earrings and jewelry. And if that was against Torah, they would have been punished for that. God would have, Elohim would have said, "This is my commandment: don't wear gold." But there's not no such rule. You read stories about Joseph and how he was adorned, and that wasn't wrong for him, because if it was, he wouldn't have accepted it, and other things like that. So, I mean, even the story of Esther and how she was dolled up. So, you can't say Esther is wicked, because Paul says this, and Esther's breaking what Paul did, or Paul was preaching. So anyway, let's continue on. I point this out because Paul's not talking about the New Testament, which has not yet been put together. Paul's talking about the Old Testament, aka the Tanakh. Far too many believe in the inerrancy and infallibility of the Bible. Yet we have just shown you that the New Testament does have at least 3 mistakes in it, and that the sayings of Paul applies to the Old Testament and not the New, or that saying of Paul applies only to the Old Testament. Okay. Getting back to the point of this article, the chronology of events of the Last Supper, which is not and never was a Passover meal. Now, this is a very controversial newsletter because the mainstream teaching is that what the Last Supper is the Passover. So this is a very controversial teaching. Let's just consider it and read it. And I'm just going to come up with an opinion after with that. Now we go to John, who was there and rested on the breast of Yeshua. John 13, verse 1. You will notice verses 1 to 5. You will notice that it was before the Passover. Exactly. It was before. You cannot eat the Passover lamb at the beginning of the 14th, which was the night before when the lambs had not yet been killed. Okay, well, I mean, that could be a little controversial because some might take, again, Exodus 12 and say, hey, this is actually the evening, the 14th, because the day starts in the evening. So I understand people might understand it that way, and that's fine. Think, brethren, stop being the dumb Christians we all used to be. Think. Now I'm going to lay out the chronology of this night of the Last Supper, which this year will be sunset, the 14th. This will be the start of the 14th of Aviv, of the 14th of the first month, the evening before Passover meal, which comes at the end of the 14th, and into the 15th or first day of unleavened bread. You can do this if you're in a small group or at home alone with one other person, but be very mindful of the seriousness of this night. It is not to be an evening of socializing or joking and talking and small talk. It is to be a very solemn and sober occasion. You are to think on the fact that your sins have caused the death of the creator of the universe, which took place beginning on this night, 1990 years ago. And I agree because you can bet that the Israelites at that night, they weren't celebrating either. They were in their homes and they could probably hear the people yelling and shouting and death cries, mourning for their firstborn. And there won't be any joy for them. They're going to probably be awake all night just in fear of what is going on and what are the repercussions of that. And, the Egyptians kill them as retribution, possibly. First Corinthians chapter 11, verses 26 to 32. If you do not consider the cost of this night, but come together to have just another meal and eat this matzah and drink this wine, just like any other night, then you bring judgment down on yourself. It is a most serious night. It is something. It even says, if you take the Passover lightly, you eat the bread, you drink the wine, and you don't really examine yourself, that's a very serious thing. So turn off the phones, the computers for this one night. Each person is to have eaten before they arrive to take part in the service. It is not to be a meal and social gathering. I stress this so that you can get your head into the right frame of mind. You do not want to become sick or die, nor your family to have this happen to them. Well, I don't know. I kind of respectfully disagree that we can't have a meal. I think Passover is a meal. Not that you're having a meal and just being gluttonous, but you are eating and you're eating whatever your fill is. I don't think it's a sin to eat. Anyway, I mean, these are feast days, are they not? So our Father wants us to eat and not just eat a crumb or like a small Ritz cracker or the size of a small cracker and a little thimble of wine. It's not about that. Like you are having a meal, but you can still eat to your, till you're full, but it doesn't mean your attitude is wrong. You can still have a good attitude and eat in gratitude and humility. What we have done in the past is to take a table and place a pure white linen cloth on it. Then the wine and the matzah bread unbroken. We then covered that with another pure white linen cloth So it looks like a white casket. Oh yeah, that's what Church of God does. That's their culture. You should conduct yourself as if at the funeral parlor, is how I would relate it. You are mourning the sins that you have brought forward, which have caused the Messiah to have to die this day. And I'm sure even the atmosphere, the emotional tone on the night that Yeshua had the dinner, the Last Supper with his disciples, they weren't laughing. They were very somber and and kind of anxious about what's going on. So each person comes in and sits down quietly and does not talk. They read the Bible about the events of this night to themselves until the service is ready to begin, which it does promptly at sunset. So again, this is Church of God culture. This is what they do. It's not in Torah. It's just how they do things. The following is the order of events and scriptures to be read on this night. This is a guide, not a law. Yeah, exactly. Matthew 26:26, Luke 22:19. Notice the word for bread here is artos. Artos in Greek. Food composed of flour mixed with water and baked. Okay. Let's get more information. The Israelites made it in the form of a oblong round cake, as thick as one's thumb, as large as a plate or platter. Hence, it was not to be cut or but broken. Loaves were consecrated to Yah. The bread used at the love feast at Yah's table, food of any kind. So those are the definitions. Then another one, artos, is showbread or a loaf. Yeshua is taking leavened bread, artos, and eating and sharing this. If this was in fact the Passover meal, then they have just eaten leavened bread and not matzos or unleavened bread, as you are told to do with the Passover. The reason Yeshua is doing this is because this is not the Passover meal, and he did dip the bread in the wine. Why would you dip something that wouldn't absorb it? So, yeah, it is leavened. For this special evening service, I would then read Isaiah 53, pretty much all of Isaiah 53. Once this part is done, then the leader can read the following Matthew 26:27. Actually, I'm just going to go over this. I won't read the scripture references anymore. Pay attention to this line here. Why does he say he shall not drink it until he is with his father? This is a huge clue. Luke 22. If Yeshua had eaten the Passover meal, then it would mean he did not die. Okay. But this meal they are now eating is not the Passover. Let me just rewind. So if Yeshua ate the Passover, then it would mean he did not die. Yeah, exactly. We will show you what this meal is very soon. We're going through the service we conduct today for this night. So bear with me while we do this and share with you the chronology of the events. This evening is also known as the foot washing night. Psalm 22. You would now pass around the wine, and each one would drink as they received it. Do do not wait and do it altogether as if in a toast. Drink it as soon as you receive it, uh, and consider the cost of your sins, our Savior's blood. Now that the bread and wine have been done, we move on to the foot washing and begin to read John 13. So, John 13. Having read this, we then go up and wash each other's feet, men with men, women with women. One time I lined up and ended up with an elderly gentleman. I let him sit and I removed his shoes and then his socks and then I washed his feet. It was the most humbling. It was most humbling for me to do this. I saw others where the father was doing their adult son and the son washing his dad's feet. So after I'd washed and dried this man's feet and helped him to put on his socks and shoes, I sat down and let him do my feet. Again, it was very humbling to allow someone to do my feet like this. I put my foot up on the chair so he did not have to get down on his knees, but he insisted on doing everything himself without my help. Once we were done, we would go back and sit and wait until everyone was back, again maintaining the quiet and sobriety of this evening. We would then begin to read the rest of the story. Note that the piece of bread Yeshua gives to Judas is bread and not matzos. This is another clue as to the time we are in. It is the beginning of the 14th. All the leavened bread was to be out of the house by the 15th, and the Passover meal was to be eaten with matzah bread or unleavened bread. So here again, this is not the Passover meal Yeshua has just eaten, John 13 and John 14 and John 15 and John 16 and John 17 and John 18, Matthew 26, 30. It is at this point we would sing one hymn, not a joyful one, but one that would reflect on the somberness of the evening. I am sorry, I cannot think of one at this time. Once we sung the hymn, we would all leave and go home with nothing else said and no socializing. Let everyone think about the events of this night. If you talk to others, then you would be interrupting them as they contemplated what they have just read and heard and done. And again, this is Church of God culture. Doesn't mean you can't talk to each other. For example, if I spoke to somebody on that night and expressed my thankfulness for the sacrifice of Yeshua, or they're talking to me about how they repented, or something that's deep. Obviously, you don't want to joke around. You want to be serious and somber. You can still talk to each other. I don't see why you can't talk to each other. It's not. There's no hard and fast law that says you can't socialize. So, anyway, this is Church of God culture. That's important to note. It's not Torah. It's not. It's not biblical culture. It's based on man's traditions. So it's mixed. It's a mix of man's traditions with something in the Bible, which is Passover. So you could then go on to read the rest of John during the day when Yeshua was killed. I also watched the movie The Passion, to remind me of the suffering he went through. And I wanted to add that look what Yeshua and his disciples did on that night. Did they talk? They did talk. Did they talk during Passover as well? Well, I mean, he was on the cross, so no. I mean, I'm sure you would have talked to them if they kind of came out of their hiding spots. But anyhow, Yeshua was the lamb. He was the Passover lamb, which was killed at 3 p.m. on the 14th of Aviv. The meal Yeshua had the night before, which we have just read about, was not the Passover meal. Once the Passover lamb is killed on the 14th, which is the exact same time when Yeshua was killed, then that lamb had to be roasted and taken back to the homes to be eaten. We do not have a temple today. You are not to kill a Passover lamb unless it is done at the temple. You can purchase lamb at the store to eat, but do not sacrifice a lamb on this day. It is murder, as Torah states. Only the high priest can do that. During this evening, when you eat the Passover lamb or chicken or fish or whatever kosher food you decide, it is the beginning of the 15th, the first day of unleavened bread, which is when the blood from that lamb killed at the temple is taken and placed on your doorpost and lintel. It is on this night of the 15th, while you're eating the lamb, that the death angel passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt. When morning came, the firstborn of all Egypt, of all the Egyptians, were dead, and Israel left Egypt, traveling over the Sinai. During the 7 days of unleavened bread, arriving at Nuweiba, where they would cross the Red Sea. I like to watch the Ten Commandments on this night. Brethren, are you aware that there's a relationship between this festival of Passover and the patriarch Abraham? Yah first mentions foot washing, unleavened bread, and wine. In a religious ceremony with Abraham, there is more to the story than what we have been told so far. Yeshua did not implement something new and foreign in his day. Abraham did not think it unusual to take of the bread and the wine with Melchizedek when he brought it out to him after the battle. Genesis 14, 17 to 20. Yeah, so notice the bread and the wine. Bread and wine is a covenant meal. The foot washing was part of the covenant process. There's one more thing that must be considered in this deal: circumcision. Genesis 17. So, Genesis 14. Let me look that up. Let me just pause and look up Genesis 14. Just doing my fact checking. I like to think the Bereans are like the ancient fact checkers. So 14:18 says Melchizedek, king of Salem or Shalom, brought forth loaves and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High Elohim, and he blessed Abraham. So that's their meal. That's what they did. That's the cultural. That's what they did in their culture. The bread and wine is a covenant meal. The foot washing was part of the covenant process. And there's one more thing. Okay, we just said that, and it's circumcision. Again, when Abraham met the angels who were on their way to Sodom, he again brought out bread and washed their feet. He will see the time of year when these angels arrive at Lot's door. And he did do that. That's just a cultural thing. Um, so should we be doing this? I don't see why we shouldn't, but it's just in that culture, their feet were very dirty, and that's how you treated your guests. Because I mean, we walk with shoes now, so I guess they're not as dirty. They just have lint. So, anyhow, Lot also knew that he was to feed the stranger and wash their feet. So you feed your stranger, good hospitality. You make them comfortable. I guess today, I don't know what the equivalent would be washing feet, but maybe it would be, I don't know, giving them an ottoman. I don't know, or taking their socks off for them. I'm not sure what it would be. Maybe moisturizing their feet. I'm really not sure. What did Abraham understand about the plan of Yah? Abraham knew about the meaning of the symbols of the covenant: foot washing, bread, wine, circumcision. Yeshua did not add anything new to this day at the beginning of the 14th. What he did was to bring back our attention to the very same things that Abraham already knew, and that's just part of our culture. It's not What he did was not extraordinary in terms of cultural norms. That was something that Israelites did in that time. But there was something more special, and he was uh, explaining the true symbolism of the bread and the wine, which was extraordinary and was never explained that way before or symbolized that way. May Yah bless you as you obey and keep his Passover according to his timing and in his order, and may he bless you as you consider the new symbols Yeshua showed us, which were there from Abraham's time until now. So if the Last Supper Yeshua ate was not Passover, then what was it? So this is taken from the newsletter January 6, 2018, so 3 years ago now. The Redeemer. I had almost completed this week's newsletter. Okay, so I'm just going to, I think I read this before, but here's a picture here uh, of when these two people in the picture uh, attended, I believe it's Jerusalem. It looks like Israel. It's a tour in Israel. Um, okay, so I'm not going to talk about the story. Just going to get to the lesson here. Okay, so the friend here, Donald, switched his position about when the Passover meal was, uh, agreeing that it was at the end of the 14th, the start of the 15th. So I suppose he once believed it was a different time, um, a different day, and not the end of the 14th. I suppose he thought it was the beginning of the 14th. Uh, Now, thanks to Donald, I have to rewrite this week's newsletter. Okay, so let me just, it's about the word redeemer. Okay, I'm just going to get into the meat of it, of where's the teaching here. Okay, Talmudic tradition. The firstborn acted as officiating priests. Okay, that's not really the lesson here. Okay, I'm going to keep going. The Pidyon Habon. Why did Yah have to pay a redemption price, and to whom? To redeem the firstborn is called the Pidyon Habon, the source for an Israelite's obligation to redeem his firstborn son through giving the Kohen, the priest, specifically 5 shekels, is written in the book of Numbers 18, verses 15 to 16. So they redeemed them with 5 shekels of silver. Numbers 18. Let's look it up. Let's fact check this. So the reason I'm doing this newsletter, I'm covering this one because I know this was published about how many days ago? Sunday, Saturday. So about 3 days ago. It's 3 days old. So maybe a lot of people have read it already, but I'm just reading it for my own benefit, primarily because To be honest, I'm still kind of on the fence as to whether this is the new year or not. I'm not 100% sure. I'm still 50-50 as to, is this really the new year? So I'm kind of proving it right now. Uh, so let's see. Numbers 15, and that was verse, or 18. Numbers 18, verses 15. This is talking about redeeming your firstborn, and it should be 5 shekels is the amount we're looking for here. So hopefully by the end of this um, broadcast, I could call it that, uh, we'll have a better idea of, is it the new year, and what was Passover, and what was the Last Supper, and timing of all these things. It's all about timing. So it says here, you shall redeem, 1850, everything that opens the womb of all flesh, man or beast, they shall be yours. Only the firstborn of men shall be surely redeemed. You shall redeem the firstborn of unclean cattle. Okay. Why would they be unclean? That's interesting. I guess it's unclean animals. The redemption of them from 5-month-old, their valuation is 5 shekels. So it is 5 shekels. But you shall not redeem the firstborn of calves, sheep, goats. They are holy. Set apart. You shall pour their blood on the altar. You shall offer the fat as a burnt offering. Okay, so that's that verse there. I'm going to go back to the newsletter. Several explanations are given for the specific amount of silver shekels used for the Pidyon Haban. The following is from the Talmud. Joseph, Rachel's firstborn son, was sold by his brothers for 20 silver pieces. Actually, in the Septuagint, I think it's 20 pieces of gold, because he isn't a regular slave. He's he's an Israelite. They don't have Israelite slaves. Notice that Israelites are not supposed to sell each other into slavery. Penalty is death when you do that. So they actually broke the Torah, although that was, I guess, codified later on with Moses. But anyhow, maybe they knew about it, maybe they didn't. But it was actually 20 pieces of gold. That's very important to know. The equivalent of 5 shekels actually would be way more than that. But anyway, this established that the standard price for a firstborn human is 5 shekels, which are given to the Kohen, God's representative, to redeem the child. Genesis 37:26. So it says here, let's look that up. I'll just show it to you. I'll prove it to you that it is not silver, it was gold. Joseph was sold for gold. And it makes sense because you can tell that even in this unrighteous situation where he was sold into slavery, his value was still expressed in what he was sold for. Um, so let's look at that 37, and that's verse 26. Okay. Verse 26, it says here in the Masoretic, Judah said, oh, no, it's the wrong one. Okay, because it's 28. There passed by Midianites, merchantmen. They drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. And then here, same thing. 20 pieces of gold. Notice that. Huge difference. It's a pretty big difference. Silver is worth a lot less than gold. Still worth a lot, but gold is worth way more. Otherwise, the temple would be made of silver, wouldn't it? But there's a lot of gold in the temple. I'm talking about Solomon's temple. Okay. A Pidyon Haban, or redemption of the firstborn son, is a ceremony wherein the father of a firstborn male redeems his son by giving 5 silver coins to a Kohen 30 days after the baby's birth. Okay. What is the reason for this procedure? Exodus 13. The first place we see the word redeem is Exodus 6, verse 6. Originally, the Israelite firstborn were the sanctified priestly class. They were inducted into God's service when they were spared from the plague of the firstborn that struck Egypt. However, when Israel, firstborn included, served the golden calf, worshipped it, the firstborn forfeited their status. The priesthood was transferred to the tribe, that did not participate in the golden calf hoopla, which is the Levites, or which are the Levites, and particularly the children of Aaron. Now we have 20 pieces of silver or gold being the price for Joseph being redeemed from the cistern. That amount equaling 5 shekels, as we were just told, Joseph represents the 12 northern tribes. It is upon his children that the name of Israel is given. Let my name Israel be carried on in them. Genesis 48, verse 15. We have another interesting story that we can also connect to uh, this, and that is into the redemption of Israel. That is the story of Hosea. Hosea represents Yah seeking his wayward bride who has gone whoring after other men. Hosea, Jehovah's redeeming Israel. Okay, so Joseph's children carry on the name of Israel, I guess even spiritually, because if you look at the modern descendants of Israel, and specifically Joseph, it's pretty much the Americans, the Canadians, the British, the Commonwealth, those are the descendants of modern day Israel. So it's interesting that they carry on the name of Israel, maybe not um, physically, like they're not called United States of Israel, they're called United States of America, but spiritually, they are the Israel because they've done a lot of backsliding and they mix a lot of uh, truth with lie and lie with truth. So, I mean, the largest Christian nation that's still with the largest amount of messianics and Church of God and people actually trying to do Torah are Americans. They're the Americans of all the countries in the world. The Americans are the ones who are having a sort of revival. I'm not saying it's millions and millions of people, but it's getting closer to a million, if it hasn't hit a million yet, of messianics, Hebrew roots, Church of God, and etc. Just people trying to follow the Bible, essentially. Now, 6 ounces is equal to 170.1 grams of silver, and 1 shekel is equal to 100 grams. So one gomer is being bought or redeemed for about 10 shekels of silver. One gomer represents Israel, Ephraim, and Manasseh, who have gone whoring after other gods. The question we are addressing this week is, why did Yah have to pay a redemption price, and to whom did he pay it? Okay, I'm going to skip over a little bit and get to the heart of the matter here. It's getting a little too too wordy and not into what it was. Okay, here it is. The Seudat Siyum. We now need to take another look at what took place on the night Yeshua was betrayed and relook at the events of this night. I have not seen this until Donald tipped me off whether or not he realized it. So the first day, or I should say the first month, 13th day of the first month in 31 AD was a Tuesday. Do not forget the day begins with sunset. Tuesday is the day before the preparation day for Passover. At the end of this, the 13th of the first and the start of the 14th, which is the start of the preparation day, the disciples had the special meal that we call the Last Supper. There was a tradition in Hebrew called Seuda Mafsechet. This translates to Last Supper. This Last Supper was about remembering that it was indeed not all Hebrews who were in danger from death at God's hand in Egypt, but only the firstborn sons. So a special nighttime meal was adopted whereby this meal would be eaten and there would be a 24-hour fast that followed. Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. Thus the name Last Supper. The next meal to be eaten was the Passover meal after the 14th had passed and the start of the 15th of Nisan was just beginning, or the Nisan is actually the first month, but that's the Babylonian name. It is at the start of the 14th of the first, this Seuda Mafseket, that Yeshua says to commemorate this day by drinking wine that symbolizes his blood that establishes the new covenant, and by eating unleavened bread that symbolizes his body. After having the Last Supper, the next event is that Judas betrays him, and shortly after midnight, Yeshua is arrested. It is still the preparation day, In the wee hours, a little before sunrise, he is tried and convicted of blasphemy by the Sanhedrin. It is still preparation day. After the Roman governor Pontius Pilate confirms his death sentence, Yeshua is scourged and nailed to the tree by Roman soldiers. It is still preparation day, Wednesday, uh, Nisan, or sorry, I keep saying the wrong word, the first day of the month, 14th. When Yeshua dies at 3 p.m. in the afternoon on this preparation day, it is the exact same time the slaughter of the Passover lambs begins in the temple grounds. Somewhere around 250,000 sheep will be killed and their blood collected between the hours of 3 and 6 p.m. It is still preparation day because the sun has not yet set, and after sunset, then the Passover meals are eaten with these lambs, which have just been killed and roasted in the temple area. It was from these lambs at this time that the blood was smeared on the doorposts and lintel of their home. So, just rewinding, this meal, this Last Supper, broke the fast of the 13th. I believe it's the 13th of the first month, which is the fast of the firstborn. So it begins on the sunset of 13th, ends at the 14th. So they would break that fast eating on the 14th. Um, and they're eating now this meal. This is just scenario one. Yeshua and his disciples are eating this meal, this Last Supper in the 14th, the beginning of the evening. And so the latter portion of the day of the 14th, which is the latter half of the 14th, since the day ends with daytime, Yeshua was killed on that day. And when he was taken down from the cross, I believe it was a high Sabbath, which is the 15th. It was the beginning of the 15th. So, yeah, it does line up with that timeline. So that scenario does, in fact, work. That the 14th, when we say the 14th, it was actually the evening. So it lines up with the Torah, even. And he has to fulfill Passover. He can't do it at the wrong time. Okay. Uh, the fast of the firstborn. So I guess, yeah, it does make sense that the lamb is killed towards the evening, towards the end, the evening meaning the 15th. So that does make sense. I can agree with that. It seems more solid in my mind now that I kind of play it out in my mind in terms of the timeline. The fast of the firstborn. Let's understand one thing very clearly. The final meal Yeshua had with his disciples was not the Passover. The Passover very plainly had not yet come. John, in describing this final meal that Yeshua had with his disciples, said, "Now before the feast of the Passover." He plainly shows this meal or banquet was before the true Passover, which was scheduled to be eaten and observed the next night. So the next day, the Yehudim would still be preparing for Passover. Therefore, what exactly was this last meal? What few have realized, not being familiar with Jewish customs of the time of Yeshua, is that this meal could not have been the Passover, since Passover lambs would not be killed until the following afternoon, and then eaten in the homes of the Yehudim on the night of the actual Passover, when Yah Elohim slew the firstborn in the land of Egypt and passed over the Israelites. Nisan, the first day or first month, 15th day. Okay. Yet obviously, this final meal was very important, a meal of close fellowship and spiritual significance. A Jewish look at the Last Supper. David Stern says in the New Testament commentary, the Last Supper is considered by most scholars to have been a Passover meal or Seder. Many Pesach themes are deepened, reinforced, and given new levels of meaning by events in the life of Yeshua the Messiah and by his words on this night. However, Joseph Shulam has suggested that it may not have been the Seder, but a Seudat Mitzvah, the celebratory banquet, accompanying performance of a commandment such as a wedding or Brit Milah. Here is the background for his argument. When a rabbi and his students finish studying a tractate of the Talmud, they celebrate with a Seudat Mitzvah, also called a Seudat Siyum, banquet of completion or a graduation. Actually, it makes a lot of sense because his disciples were students and he was the teacher. So this is their graduation ceremony. It's makes a lot of sense. This explanation does. The fast of the firstborn, expressing gratitude for the saving of Israel's firstborn sons from the 10th plague, has been prescribed for the day before Pesach, the 14th of the first month, at least since Mishnaic times. When it is necessary to eat a Seudat mitzvah, this takes precedence over a fast. With a modicum of foresight, a rabbi can plan to complete a tractate on the 14th and thus avoid having to fast. Doing so is not construed as cheating, and in fact, it has become the custom. The tradition of the fast of the firstborn dates at least from Mishnaic times, but Shulam reasons. If it goes back a couple of centuries, more to the time of Yeshua, if the Seudat Seyum custom applied in the first century to the completing of any course of study, then Yeshua might have arranged to have himself and his Talmudim, students, disciples, finish reading a book of the Tanakh on the 14th. Or, since Yeshua knew he was going to die, he may have regarded it as appropriate to complete his disciples' earthly course of study with a banquet. This solution would also resolve the perceived conflict between John and the Synoptic Gospels over the timing of the Last Supper. In other words, there is much more to this passage in 1 Corinthians 11 and its meaning than we have supposed. Uh, although there is no doubt that Yeshua, the Messiah, presented the new meanings of the bread and the wine as representing his broken body and shed blood given on our behalf at the Last Supper, and that these symbols are directly involved in the Passover Seder held on the 15th. It is also a fact that this final meal was one day before the Passover. It is also a fact that Yeshua did not tell his disciples that they should institute a new commandment or a new holy day and begin observing the 14th on the evening as a memorial of this last supper. However, he was having a final banquet with them, a special and unique fellowship meal with them, where all of them were relaxed, reclining at ease, and experiencing a very close oneness with each other. This was similar to a Passover Seder in some respects, but yet different. The Greek word artos. Interestingly, when Yeshua held this final dinner with his disciples, the word John used to describe it was diep non, which means supper, the principal meal, dinner. It is used of the Last Supper Yeshua held with his disciples and other main meals of the day. This word is never used of an annual festival or of the Passover. However, it simply refers to the main meal of the day, usually at evening. Furthermore, at this final dinner or banquet, there's no mention of a lamb being eaten, which would have been necessary if this were the Passover. And they had the priesthood at that time. They had the order of the priesthood that wasn't phased out, that still existed. And John the Baptist is proof that that still went on. His father was doing the priestly courses. So yeah, they would do an actual sacrifice of a lamb. In the temple, they had people selling animals because they were doing animal sacrifice up to that point. The gospel accounts would hardly have neglected to mention such an important feature. So that's a big, important thing that they didn't eat lamb. They should have if they were doing Passover. But even more interesting is the fact that Jewish custom of the time and always has dictated that unleavened bread was not to be eaten during the days before the feast of unleavened bread, so that the feast would be set apart as distinct and real. And mental note, I'm going to read this tab before we close about are there 8 days of unleavened bread. For unleavened bread to have been eaten before the festival would have diminished its importance during the feast itself. Therefore, if Yeshua and his disciples had eaten unleavened bread on the night of the 14th, they would have violated Jewish custom and practice. It is very interesting, therefore, to notice that when Yeshua sat down at dinner at that final meal with his disciples, as they were eating, Yeshua took bread and blessed it. Many Greek copies have gave thanks, and broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." The word for bread here is artos and means bread, as raised a loaf. This same word is used in Matthew 4 3 to 4. Man does not live by bread alone. In Matthew 6:11, our daily bread, and Matthew 16:12, the leaven of bread, etc. This word is often used of leavened bread. Generally, whenever unleavened bread is meant, this word is preceded by the Greek word for unleavened, which is azumos, meaning unleavened, uncorrupted. But in the three synoptic gospel accounts of the Last Supper of Yeshua and his disciples, the writers always use only the word artos, meaning bread, without the modifying word azumos to designate unleavened. Therefore, the clear indication is that at the Last Supper, Yeshua used normal leavened bread when he blessed and broke it and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Here is further proof that this dinner was not and could not have been the Passover, the real bread at the Last Supper. Further proof that Yeshua and his disciples did not and could not have eaten the Passover with its unleavened bread at the Last Supper on the eve or beginning of the first of the 14th, and the 14th of the first month is plain and simple Jewish law at the time. It is a historical fact that when the scriptures used the expression kept the Passover, Ezra 6:19, it refers strictly to the slaying of the Passover lamb on the 14th of the first, whereas the expression eat the Passover was fulfilled the coming evening of the 15th, which was the beginning of the eating of unleavened bread on the night to be much observed, the watch to be kept, uh, or the night watch to be kept, actually, in the literal sense. The reason why this evening was called the night to be much observed was because the Passover meal was always eaten as the first meal uh, in the feast of unleavened bread. Also, according to Jewish law of the times, it was absolutely forbidden to eat unleavened bread during the 24-hour period prior to the first night of unleavened bread. This was a distinction made by law to sanctify, set apart the sacred meaning of the feast from whatever they may have eaten for bread on the previous days. This means that Yeshua and the disciples could not have eaten unleavened bread the evening prior to the night to be much observed. Also, the Gospels indicate that Yeshua was keeping the fast of the firstborn during the daylight hours of the crucifixion day. This was a daytime fast observed by all firstborn Yehudim on the preparation day in remembrance of Yah Elohim protecting the firstborn of Israel while killing the firstborn of Egypt. Okay, yeah, I guess uh, reviewing what I just said uh, earlier about this fast, the fast of the firstborn actually it begins on the 13th and ends, uh, I believe, on the 14th. So if this meal took place on the 12th, then they would be fasting on the 13th to the 14th. But that doesn't make sense because how can Yeshua be sacrificed and it's not actually on the day of the Passover? Um, that doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, I'm leaning towards it being their Last Supper was actually was beginning on the 14th, meaning they were fasting the day before on the 13th, uh, evening of 13th, ending on the 14th. So they had that meal, and then the following day, uh, if Yeshua was really fasting, he wouldn't have taken the wine when they offered it to him on the stick. So I don't know. I don't think he was fasting, to be honest. This also explains Yeshua's remark in Matthew 26:29. I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine till that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Obviously, Yeshua did not drink any wine the following day. Furthermore, this explains why he refused to accept the vinegar mixed with gall. Actually refused it, but then he did drink it after refusing it. The Hebrew text of Matthew's Gospel, written by the Spanish Jewish scholar Shem Tov ben Shaprut, reads, "And gave him wine mixed with gall." See, so he did. But when he began to drink it, he perceived and would not drink it. He perceived what it was. It was a painkiller. That's what it was. It's a painkiller. So he stopped drinking it because he realized this is not what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to take the full brunt of the experience, of the pain, of the sins. He can't uh, have a painkiller to dumb down his senses, or maybe make him die quicker, or whatever it is. Anyway, Yeshua must have remembered he was observing the fast of the firstborn. Again, that's speculation. The Greek word for taste used in this verse produced a false impression. Yeshua remembered before he drank and swallowed. So again, this is a little bit of a contradiction. How can he be fasting if he's the Passover? On Passover, you don't fast on Passover. Passover is where you eat. So you kill the lamb on the Passover day and you eat the lamb. So if Yeshua was fasting on that day, he's actually not keeping the law. So that's why I conclude it wasn't Passover day. I mean, it was Passover day, and it wasn't the fast day because, again, they're killing the lambs on this time between, I think he said, 3 to 6 p.m. You're going to be eating the lamb uh, on that same day, pretty much, I guess, towards the evening, however they say it, in the evening. How is it expressed in Exodus 12? It says here, towards the evening, right? And the beginning of the day. Let me just fact check it one more time. I'm pretty sure it's Exodus 12, if I'm not mistaken. I might have to pause it. It's going a little bit slow. Oh, is it resuming? Okay, so, oh, what happened? Okay, are we recording? Okay, here. It says here, so you take the lamb, kill it toward the evening. So it is toward the evening. So that is the 14th. And it's being killed toward the evening of the 15th. So, in fact, yeah, they did take the lamb and they killed it toward the evening. And they killed Yeshua toward the evening as well. He died um, on the evening, or not the evening, but on the day portion of the 14th, meaning he is the Passover. And they would eat it on that the 15th with unleavened bread. So let's continue on. Clearly, then, the bread which Yeshua broke and gave to his disciples during the beginning portion of the 14th in the evening, that's the beginning, at his final supper with them must have been and indeed was leavened bread. But can this be? Can leavened bread as well as unleavened bread represent the body of Yeshua, the Messiah? The answer is yes. Leviticus 23:17 talks about they bake leavened cakes or leavened bread for the Feast of Pentecost. And the showbread was presented, that's leavened as well. These loaves were made of fine wheat, flour, okay, etc. So, yeah, these were leavened loaves at Passover. Sorry, not Passover, Pentecost. When leavened bread is a type of the body of Messiah and represents his flesh, which he gave for the sins of the world, to the Yehudim, unleavened or flat bread represented affliction and poverty, as when the Israelites came out of Egypt. But leavened loaves of bread, as were sacrificed at Pentecost to Yah, typify abundance, richness, wealth. The typology should be clear. The Messiah crucified was an affliction, flatness, abject, beaten, bruised, pierced, pummeled, the perfect type being unleavened bread. The Messiah, as the richness of the abundance of life, Life-giving bread is pictured by uh, the loaves of beautiful, sweet-smelling leavened bread. Don't all of us enjoy a beautiful loaf of homemade leavened whole wheat bread straight out of the oven steaming? Therefore, the richness of leavened bread also symbolizes Yeshua the Messiah, the bread of life. Notice the bread of life, John chapter 6. Yeshua fed the multitude from a few loaves of bread and a few fishes. He declared that I am the bread of life. So, Yeshua then is the bread of life. This is a reality. This is not just Passover. Throughout the year, every day, day in and day out, Yeshua the Messiah remains and is the bread of life, which came down from heaven. We should be eating of this bread daily as we study the scriptures. Yeshua went on to declare, it is the spirit that quickens, the flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit, they are life. John 6:63. Thus, even regular bread is a type of the richness of the life-giving bread of Yeshua, the Messiah. In this sense, the leaven represents fullness and abundance. True Christians, as members of the body of Mashiach, also are one bread in the Messiah. So 30 pieces of silver. Now, with everything you have been shown thus far, consider the following. Zechariah 11:10 to 14. In Matthew, we learn how Judas has agreed to betray Yeshua. Next, we read about the betrayal of Yeshua in John 13:21 to 30. We read the rest of what Judas has done, Matthew 27:3 to 10. I will share next what is commonly said about this transaction and then share my thoughts on it. Um, so this is Zechariah 11:12 to 13, about 30 pieces of silver. I'm going to look that up and just fact check it. Zechariah 11, verses 12 and 13 read in the Septuagint, and I will say to them, if it be good in your eyes, give me my price, or refuse it. And they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. And Yah said to me, drop them into the furnace, and I will see if it is good metal, as I was proved for their sakes. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them into the furnace in the house of Yah. Wow. So it's not the potter, it's actually into the furnace. That's talking about trials. That makes a lot more sense now. Wow, that's coming up. I haven't even covered that section of scripture yet in my series, but that's very, very, very interesting and very insightful. So Zechariah 11:12 to 13, 30 pieces of silver is the price Zechariah receives for his labor. He takes the coins, throws them to the potter. Actually, now he notes the furnace. Klaus Schilder notes that Zechariah's payment indicates an assessment of his worth, as well as his dismissal. 30 pieces of silver was the price of a slave. Again, common slave, not an Israelite. Israelites are worth more than slaves. You don't sell Israelites into slavery. That's a capital punishment, a crime with the penalty of death. While Zechariah calls the amount of a handsome price, this could be sarcasm. However, regards it as considerable sum of money. Schilder suggests that these 30 pieces of silver get bandied back and forth by the spirit of prophecy. When the chief priests decide to buy a field with the return money, Matthew says that this fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, namely, they took the 30 silver coins, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field, as Yah commanded me. Although many scholars see Jeremiah's name as included in error, Jeremiah's purchase of a field in Jeremiah 32 may indicate that both prophets are in mind. Craig Blomberg argues that Matthew is using typology in his quotation rather than any kind of single or double fulfillment of actual predictive prophecy. According to Blomberg, Matthew is telling his readers that, like Jeremiah and Zechariah, Jesus attempts to lead his people with a prophetic and pastoral ministry but instead he ends up suffering innocently at their hands. William Hendrickson argues that Matthew is referring to Jeremiah 19. Blomberg also suggests that Matthew may also be saying that Yeshua's death is a ransom, the price paid to secure a slave's freedom, and that the use of the blood money to buy a burial ground for foreigners may hint at the idea that Yeshua's death makes salvation possible for all the peoples of the world, including the Gentiles. The 1877 Handy Book for Bible Readers states that Argurian Argenteus denarius, this word occurs in two passages. The account of the betrayal of our Lord for 30 pieces of silver. These have usually been considered to be denarii, but on no sufficient ground. The parallel passage in Zechariah is translated 30 pieces of silver, but which should doubtless be read 30 shekels of silver, whilst it is observable that 30 shekels of silver was the price of blood to be paid in the case of a servant accidentally killed. The passage may therefore be explained as 30 shekels of silver, not surrent shekels, but tetradrachms of the Attic standard of the Greek cities of Syria and Phoenicia. These tetradrachms were common at the time of our Lord, and of them the stater was a specimen. Slave captives, death redemption. There is something very special about this fast of the firstborn and the money paid to redeem the firstborn. And when we actually see it played out in real time at the crucifixion, we should be able to draw understanding from it. But we do not because of so much confusion about the events and because we have not obeyed for over 2,700 years. So we have lost much understanding. Yah had to pay the ruler of this world, Satan the destroyer, for those whom Yah was redeeming, the same as Hosea did for his adulterous wife, whom he brought back. The price of redeeming the firstborn was set at 5 shekels. The price for Gomer was equivalent to about 10 shekels. 30 silver coins, the word used in Matthew 26:15, silver coins. So people disagree with what it means, but anyhow, Tyrian shekel. So anyhow, I'm trying to say that the redemption price is connected to the 30 pieces of silver. Exactly how I will leave for you to ponder. This day called the fast of the firstborn is directly connected to the fast of the Day of Atonement, as we showed you last week. The goat that represented Yah was killed on the Day of Atonement. This is the sacrifice that shows us we will be killing Yah. We were to kill the goat that represented him, the same as we were to take the other goat that looks just like the one that represents Yah and cast it into the wilderness with all the guilt from our sins placed upon it. This goat represented Satan the destroyer. So, because these two holy days are connected in that the lamb that is killed also represents Yah at atonement, so we are to fast at this time. It is the fast of the firstborn. But although we have the symbolism here in the redemption of the firstborn, and we have it already stated that the 30 pieces of silver were to be used to buy the potter's field as groves for the strangers, or graves, say graves. It has been stated that this field represents the rest of the Gentile world. Now let us go back once again to Genesis 15:17 to 21. And I think that's where, um, okay, anyway, Yah made this blood covenant by himself. He swore by his own life. There's no higher authority than he. Then at Mount Sinai, Yah again reaffirms this covenant with all of Israel, whom he had just bought with the lives of the Egyptians from the destroyer. In Exodus, starting in chapter 19 and going all the way to 34, is the covenant with all of Israel, and we all agreed to obey it. Now, this too was a blood covenant, which means that if either party breaks these things they have agreed to in it, then they would pay with their lives. Israel did break this agreement and is guilty of sin, and thus must pay for this with their lives. But Yah has shown us just how much he loved Israel, and not just Israel, but all of mankind, by giving his own life as payment for us breaking the covenant of Mount Sinai. He has redeemed us with his own blood, the redemption price of the firstborn, as shown to us each time we keep the Pidyon Haban, and again each year we keep the Last Supper, not as the Passover meal, which is the next night, but as this special night in which he paid for us on this day by his own blood. We know this is what he did because of the fact that the dead who were held prisoners by Satan up until that time had not had not and had not had what until that time had never come back to life from the grave until Yeshua came out of the grave at the end of the Sabbath. Okay, yeah. This is the first time, other than Lazarus, that anyone has come out of the grave. Matthew 27:50 to 53. This was the first Chag of unleavened bread. It is the first wave offering. It is the first time any of the saints were brought back to life. Paul tells us how Yeshua led the captives, Ephesians 4:8, 1 Corinthians 15:20 to 26. This event that took place after the payment had been executed is the redemption of mankind from the grave. It took place on the wave sheaf day. It is what the wave sheaf represents. Those saints who obeyed were brought back to life on wave sheaf day. All of those from the time of Adam until this day in 31 CE were brought back to life and then ascended to heaven at 9 a.m. that first day of the week on the morning portion with Yeshua. Those captives were those who were held by Satan in death. They are now free and ascended with Yeshua to heaven. The next wave offering to take place happens at the end of the tribulation on Shavuot, when the next wave offering of 2 loaves of bread are waved. This is the one that all those since 31 CE until that time who have died, and even those who are alive, will be brought back to life, and or changed in the twinkling of an eye, and rise to meet him in the air. 1 Corinthians 15:50 to 57. Again, death is captivity, and captivity means to be a captive of Satan. What is to be thrown into the lake of fire in the end? Revelation 20:11 to 15, 4 to 6. I do hope I have been able to convey this new to me, this understanding that is new to me and some of you. I hope you can see the great and mightiness of Yah in everything he's doing. Yah is our Redeemer. Yah is the one who paid the redemption price with his own blood for us and for all mankind. Various scriptures here. I'll just scan them with my eyes. Psalm 19:14. Isaiah 41:14. Jeremiah 50:34. Amos 4:13. Isaiah 43:14 to 15. Isaiah 44:6. Isaiah 49:26. Again, these are the words of Yeshua, because he was the Elohim of the Old Testament. No one has ever heard the Father's voice or seen him at any time, only the Son. So that's important to remember. Look at this verse above again and note what it is saying to you. I am Yah, your Yeshua and your Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. Isaiah 54:5, Isaiah 43:3. Let me show you the scripture in the Hebrew, and I want you to think on it some over this coming week. Isaiah 43, 3, Jeremiah 31:10-11, Jeremiah 50:33-34. What some today claim as Passover at the end of the 13th day and the start of the 14th day, known as the Last Supper, is in fact the Last Supper for those who are firstborn. They will now fast until the Passover meal the next evening. And I disagree with that, obviously, because you can't have the lamb being slain on the fast of the firstborn. He's the one. He's the one who is the Passover, and on that Passover day, people are eating. So I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. That would be, in fact, breaking the fast, wouldn't it? They do this because the firstborn of Egypt paid for their freedom with their lives on that night of the Exodus. Yeshua never replaced the Passover of the Exodus with a new law on a new day. Don't you either try and rewrite the law to suit modern day misunderstandings. Okay, so again, if the Last Supper, let's just say it was the, as he's saying, the fast. So, and the fast of the firstborn actually takes place, I believe, on the 13th, the day before Passover. So they would be eating a meal, and the Last Supper is their meal on the evening of the, I guess, the 12th, going by that other scenario, scenario B. So they're eating in the night or the evening, and this is now this is the end of the 12th and the start of the 13th. So in preparation for that fast, they're eating this meal as their Last Supper, and then they're fasting. And so on the 13th, the day portion of the 13th, they're killing the lamb. And that would be wrong because you're not supposed to kill the lamb on the 13th. You kill it on the 14th towards the evening, as it says in Exodus 12 in verse 6, towards the evening. So that is in fact wrong, meaning that meal was most likely when they broke their fast. So they fasted on the 13th evening, and this is now the 14th evening. So they're breaking that fast, that Yeshua and his disciples, and they're having a type of, to be honest, it isn't a Passover. Just like Joseph said, and I agree with him, it isn't a Passover. It is simply a traditional meal, a cultural meal that was common at that time, where they, not common, but I mean, it was commonly known and kept, and it was also symbols of a covenant. Bread and wine are symbols of covenant, and like you said, the foot washing is also a symbol of a covenant. So it's like a covenant meal that they had. Really, it's not like a normal dinner, like a regular run of the mill dinner. It's a covenant meal, and also graduation, many things possibly. But here it says kill it toward the evening, so it is the 14th of the month, and they kill it on the 14th. So that means it cannot be the 13th at all. It has to be the day portion of the 14th, and the beginning of the 15th is then the evening. So I think that pretty much sums it up. I mean, that clears it up, what it was. I had another thought, but I just lost my train of thought. Anyway, yeah, so that is the fast of the firstborn. So they did fast. The disciples did. Yeshua did. Possibly. I mean, it's speculation. We didn't notice if they did or not. It isn't mentioned in the Gospels. And I just got my train of thought back, and it's this. So why did Yeshua say to his disciples, tell the person who owns the property my master needs this room or some place to keep the Passover with his disciples. Why did they say that? Now, this is my own personal opinion here. Let me just put on the camera so you can. I feel like maybe people should see my body language here. Makes more sense. And okay, so why would Yeshua? Yeah, why would Yeshua tell his disciples to say that to get the room? Well, there's multiple reasons, and I'll tell you why. In my opinion, why I believe Yeshua said this. Well, number one, again, the disciples were not given the Holy Spirit at that point to the degree, or even at all. Maybe it seems in Shavuot that's when it was given to them the Comforter, right? They haven't received the Comforter yet that helped them to remember all things and all the things He told them. So I believe, in my opinion, um, that He told them this. We need a place to keep the Passover because they weren't fully convinced or convicted that He was even going to die. Because every time He would tell them, they would even talk about it. They would just kind of like brush it off in their minds, kind of silently. It's like if I had a bunch of friends, I kept telling them, "Oh man, they're gonna kill me tomorrow," and what are they gonna say? Like, "All right," no, they're just gonna go, let's not talk about that." You know what I mean? It's awkward for them. So Yeshua said this to kind of make them a little more positive in a way that we're going to be keeping the Passover, although He knew they weren't going to actually keep the Passover because He is the Passover. So He was kind of telling them, I don't want to say this, but I'm going to have to say it. There's no other way to say it. It's a white lie, because it's not actually wrong to tell a white lie. It's not against Torah to tell white lies if it's going to help somebody to stay positive and to keep going and to preserve life, or to further the plan of Yah. So, for example, you have the examples of the people, the spies who were harbored by that lady in the wall, and she had to tell a white lie to preserve their lives, and other things like that. So, um, other accounts where many people in the faith and very righteous people would tell white lies. Again, it's even with, I mean, I'm not saying we have to be just deceiving and deceptive, but there are right times to do it. So Yeshua did tell his disciples this, and my speculation again is because they're of the mindset that this isn't going to happen. You're not going to be executed in Jerusalem, and we're not going to let anyone take you. And he kind of led them to that sort of thinking, not that he was misleading them like on purpose, but for example, he said, let's get swords. Do you have swords? And they got two, and he said, okay, that's enough. So one disciple, the one that chopped off the ear of the servant there, he was definitely of that mindset that no, he's not going to die. And even one of his disciples said, "No, may you never be taken," and something like that. And Yeshua responded, "Get behind me, Satan! Get behind me! You're being like the enemy that's being adversarial towards the plan of Yah." Not saying he was literally Satan, but I mean, you're not going, you're not for the plan right now. You're going against what my mission is, my objective. So you can see that there's at least two disciples, if not more, that were not of the mindset, that didn't really believe what Yeshua told them, that he is going to be delivered up into the hands of the Romans and the leaders of the Yehudim, and he would die. He'd be embarrassed, humiliated, and just mocked, and just the most humiliating death, and one of the most painful deaths, if not the most painful death of all time, um, that any human ever suffered, and and he didn't deserve any of it. So um, I think that's why he framed it that way, because they're of that mindset that they're going to keep the Passover. So they are fully expecting that they would do it on the 15th, as a group, complete group. all together and as one, like one family kind of thing. Um, yeah. So, and another reason I believe is because they wouldn't be able to secure that property or that room, the upper room they call it, that was furnished, if he didn't say it was for Passover. For example, if he just said, "Oh, I need this property," and they would say, "Why?" And if the disciples didn't say what Yeshua told them to say, which was to keep the Passover, but they just said, "Oh, because we just want to have a covenant meal," the guy probably would have declined. He would have said, "I don't know about that." But since they said Passover, it's like, "Oh yeah, that's what everyone uses it for. It's normal." It's like, I need this banquet hall. Why? Because I'm having a wedding. Like, okay, or a graduation or whatever, something that people usually book it for. So he's saying, you book this place because this is the reason our master wants to keep the Passover. It's like, okay, no problem. He, so I believe that's why he was framing it that way. And again, Joseph is right. That wasn't the Passover. That was a meal, a covenant meal that is separate from Passover. Most likely was the breaking of the fast after the 13th, where they fast between the 13th evening to uh, 14th evening, where they break the fast, and then the following day, the day portion of the 14th, that's where they killed the lamb, and Yeshua fulfilled the very rehearsal of what we've been rehearsing as humankind, as a species, for thousands and thousands of years, with all of the tons of animals that were killed. And I mean, did these animals really deserve to die? I mean, what sin did they commit? They didn't. That's the answer. Um, so they represented, they were a type of Yeshua, especially like lambs. Like, they're so trusting. One of the most inoffensive and defenseless and trusting animals is sheep, especially lambs, a baby sheep. So he had to fulfill that. It couldn't be at any other day. Couldn't be at any other time of the day. It had to be exactly when it was prescribed in Scripture. So yeah, that's that. I'm gonna go over this. This is an important part too. This is not part of the newsletter, but just for people who want to clarify, um, do we eat unleavened bread for 7 days or 8 days? And I was sent this article, but it's not so much about the article itself. It's more about the verse that really uh, tells us when when we start eating it, the unleavened bread, I should say. So it says here, Exodus 12:18. That's the verse. That's pretty much the verse that did it for me. That proved how many days we're eating unleavened bread. So let's read it together. So it says here, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, is the Masoretic text. At evening you shall eat unleavened bread until the 1 and 20th day of the month at evening. So so some people take this to understand the evening of the 14th. So that means that 14th doesn't count. So in the Masoretic, it doesn't count. So we're actually starting on the 15th. So 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So it's 7 days. And it says here, 7 days, leaven shall not be found in your houses. So that part is agreed on, that it is 7 days of no leaven being found. But, and I have to uh, like double down on this. Let's look at the Septuagint. It says beginning the 14th day of the first month, not just in the 14th day. I mean, even if it's in the 14th day at evening, evening is the beginning of the day anyhow. It's not the 15th, but here it's really, really, really clear. It's the beginning of the 14th day. It's not the end part, the latter half of the 14th day. So we can, you shall eat unleavened bread from evening till the 21st day of the month, till evening. So that's 14. It's just 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. It's 8 days. So it is 8 days, going by scripture, not by anyone's articles. It's just they mention this verse, and reading the verse, it's self-explanatory. It's black and white. It can't be taken any other way. How else can you interpret this verse? The 14th day from evening. Evening's the beginning of the day. That's what Genesis says. In the evening or the morning, or the X day, whatever number of day it was. And it says, eat unleavened bread. So if Yeshua and his disciples were eating that supper, and uh, again, that was on the evening portion of the 14th day, which is the end of the fast of the firstborn, they were eating unleavened bread. And the reason why I'm not going to get into a big argument about about what Joseph just wrote in that newsletter, but when we think of unleavened bread, we think matzos, we think like crackers. But if you actually make unleavened bread, if you actually bake unleavened bread, you'll know that it isn't crackers or matzos. It is actually kind of, it can absorb. It is like, I guess the closest thing is like a pita. If you ever had a pita, it's soft, but it just doesn't rise. It's still soft. It is just not, uh, it's not fluffy like a big, croissant or something like that. It's not like Italian bread or baguettes or anything like that. It's just flat. It's like flat bread. I mean, it's not like a what's that? Like the burrito. It's not like that flat, but you can still dip it anyway. I mean, it's still somewhat absorbent. Um, so that's why I do believe they're eating unleavened bread just because it says here in the Torah, and we know Yeshua didn't break the Torah. You came to fulfill the Torah, so most likely it was unleavened bread that they were eating there. I know it says artos and all that, but at the same time, it might just be a misunderstanding that artos could be unleavened bread, perhaps. Um, anyway, I'm going by what the Torah says, and I'm going by the fact that Yeshua didn't break the Torah, and he wouldn't break the Torah. He wouldn't eat anything but unleavened bread. He wouldn't. He would follow this not just to the letter, but to the spirit, most of all. So I am of the opinion and of the mindset that Yeshua not only gave us his law, he also kept the law to the spirit and to the intent, because he's the one who wrote it. He's the one who gave it to us. So again, beginning the 14th of the first month from evening, which was their last supper, uh, they started to do that. They had that meal, and yeah, I guess it was sort of like a Passover meal, but not the Passover meal with the lamb, because that's still to come on the 15th. So that's a separate meal altogether. So this meal could be part of the Passover. It could be a covenant meal. It's hard to say 100% with 100% certainty, but going by this, what it says here, it's the 14th, and they did do that on the 14th. So it's not a contradiction. It is somewhat Passover, but not the Passover portion where the lamb, because that's still on the 15th. That would be on the 15th of the first month. So I mean, you have to distinguish that these two things. That yeah, they are eating um, on the 14th day, but it says here that they are eating the lamb as well. But that was like it says here. Let's look back a few verses here. See, they killed the lamb toward the evening of the 14th, and then on that night they roasted with fire. That's the 15th already. This is the 15th, so they're eating on the 15th. And the disciples' full expectation was they would eat the Passover with their master on the 15th, but they still had to eat this meal on the 14th with the bread and the wine and whatnot, because that wasn't the actual, that wasn't the main course, I should say. That's kind of like the first course leading up to this bigger feast of the 15th, which is the holy day as well. I mean, the 14th isn't a holy day where you don't rest. The 15th is. The 15th is. That's the bigger feast. That's the main event kind of thing. And then going on from the 15th up to the 21st, which is another holy day on the 21st. There's going to be a lot of feasting in between, but it's really the 15th that this feast centers around, which is the death of the lamb, the killing of the lamb. And Yeshua fulfilled that. So he technically couldn't keep it with his disciples. He knew he wouldn't be able to, because that was all a rehearsal. It's like saying, okay, guys, we practice every day for the Super Bowl. This is Tom Brady speaking. my name is Tom Brady, and we practice every day for the Super Bowl. And tomorrow, you're expecting me to practice again for the Super Bowl, but I'm actually in the back of Tom Brady's head. He's saying, I'm actually going to be. I'm using Tom Brady as a sort of Jesus Christ here, as a Yeshua, a Mashiach, that tomorrow is actually the Super Bowl. You guys don't realize it, but I'm going to be actually fulfilling this practice and playing in the Super Bowl. I'm actually going to be doing it, like executing what we've been rehearsing all along for, so many practices. So this dress rehearsal that we've been doing over and over, the Passover, the Passover, the Passover, since the time of Moses, and even probably before that, I'm going to be fulfilling this feast, this Moedim, this appointed time. I'm going to be fulfilling it with my life, literally with my life. So I can't keep it with you. And he's been telling them that. He's been saying they're going to deliver me up. When I get to Jerusalem, I'm going to be delivered into their hands. They're going to put me to death. And he probably told them when on the Passover. It wasn't a coincidence. It was very much to the very millisecond. It was so accurate, to the point. It didn't deviate by any stretch of the imagination in any way, time wise or even Torah wise. Um, Yeshua kept the full law to the very letter, to the very spirit, to the intent, everything, because he gave it, and he is the living law. He is the living Torah. So he wouldn't break his own words, because God, Elohim, does not break his promises. He doesn't break his word. He fulfills it. He uh, he is good, and his word is good. So anyway, it does say that in verse 18. It's pretty clear cut. Even in the Masoretic, it even alludes to it. The first on the 14th of the month, you eat unleavened bread. It doesn't say the 15th, so it's the 14th. You're actually eating it. So technically, it is 8 days. It is 8 days we're eating it. But I mean, you know what? I don't think whether it's 7 or 8. I don't think it's something that. Um, I mean, it does say you shall eat it, so it's pretty. I don't want. I was going to say it's not a salvation issue, but I mean, it is a commandment. So if we break it, that's kind of serious. If you break that, so let's not break that. Let's eat unleavened bread from the 14th, like it says, at evening to the 21st day at evening, which is 8 days. Okay, so I don't know how this got confused, but I think the confusing thing is, was the Last Supper actually the 13th or the 14th, or what was it? Was it the meal before the fast of the firstborn? Was it after the fast of the firstborn? And it's looking like it is after the fast of the firstborn, because again, this is the 14th. This is the 14th day when he was murdered, when they executed him, Yeshua, when he was delivered up into their hands, and that's the day you actually eat unleavened bread from the evening. Uh, he was delivered on the day portion of that day, so they were already eating. They already started it, and you're not supposed to fast during a feast. That's just common sense. You don't do that. You're going to be breaking the law if you don't eat. So him not taking that mixture of vinegar and whatever it was, the painkiller, because it was a painkiller. He didn't refuse it because he was fasting. It's because he didn't want to have his pain numbed. Because he's supposed to take on all our all our stripes, all our transgressions, and that's not kind of being done if he's having the pain numbed. It's sort of cheating in a way. So he didn't do that. Maybe he kind of tasted it, and he perceived what it was. He probably spat it out. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but anyway, that's all for this newsletter. Thank you very much for your time. Really good newsletter. Really good. It's just, I have to clarify um, what it was. Was it the Passover? It's looking like it was not the Passover with the lamb, because again, those are two different meals. The 14th is where you do eat unleavened bread, and they're eating with wine. In the case with Yeshua and his disciples, but that wasn't the actual main course. Like that wasn't the main day for the Passover, where it's part where the lamb is there and everything, where you have the lamb, because that's culturally and traditionally what they've been doing for thousands of years, and they were fully expecting to keep the Passover with eating lamb with their master, but it didn't happen. Um, they weren't just going to have one feast on that one day. They're expecting we're going to rent this place for a longer stretch of time. And then when all that didn't happen, and Yeshua was captured, and the disciples fled, and they went back to their old jobs, and they just were disillusioned. It reminds me of, I'm going to say it, but it reminds me of with the presidential election. A lot of the supporters of a certain person, who rhymes with rump, were so disappointed that not only was the election very much suspect in how votes were handled and all that, but a lot of the people who were supporters of President Rump, they pretty much jumped ship. They're like, it's all over. And that's where we are right now. A lot of people are still like heads hanging down and just like giving up on their country, giving up on patriotism, not patriotism, but giving up on the movement. And they just lost hope. And that's where the disciples were after Yeshua was crucified. I'm not equating it with that, but I'm saying that's a similar kind of um, similar sort of roller coaster ride. Although I'm sure the disciples had a it was way bigger because that was life and death, and their lives were at stake. Whereas people in America, it's not like they're being hunted down. I mean, not yet. I mean, not that they're being hunted down literally. More like social media, they're being hunted down and hunted down in other ways, and being ostracized and being fired from jobs, things like that. So I mean, that's a similar thing. So that's all for this newsletter, audio newsletter, video deal. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the next newsletter. I still haven't really decided, is it really New Year or not. Maybe I might do it in another video. I feel like this is already a long video. I'll probably do that tomorrow because I'm getting a little tired. Yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. I did get some different emails, and I'll look over that and cover that tomorrow. There might be another newsletter about the new year, so we'll see. I just need more and more proof and more. I need to do more homework on that, more research as to is it really the new year? Because I'm not 100% convinced, but I'm not 100% not convinced either. There is substantial evidence, but I still need to prove that without a shadow of a doubt. Like how much is how much of the barley do you need? How much ripe barley do you need? How much Aviv barley do you need? How is it just an omer? Like, and is it do we meet all the requirements, kind of thing? Okay, that's all. Thank you very much for your time. God bless you all. Make your way prosperous. Shalom.